One of the most powerful tools I use in Photoshop is Selective Color. If you're looking for a way to improve your tones and to give your images the rich colors that they deserve, Selective Color is going to offer an easy solution. Throughout this video, I'm going to give you an in-depth look into a couple of photos using Selective Color, and I'm going to cover todo el pedo. In this first image, I'm going to take my time because I want to show you the ins and outs of how Selective Color works, because I want to show you the various options that you have from blend modes and layer mask to get that true color tone that we're trying to achieve. Here in this little folder, I already have the final product, so we're going to take it from the before and then the after using layer masks and the blend modes. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off. And let's go ahead and take a look at Selective Color. My favorite method to get Selective Color is clicking this icon down here at the bottom and selecting Selective Color, which is at the very bottom. Now, once I have that, you should be prompted with a dialog box, and this is what it looks like. If you don't have the Properties dialog box, you can go to Window and then Properties to make sure that it's actually showing up. And then in the colors, what's cool about Selective Color is that you have the options to choose which color you want to target so that you can mix and match colors within that range that you select. And that's what makes Selective Color very powerful. In other words, you're kind of like making a selection and you can only target that specific color that you choose from the list here. Now for the whites, what you're doing there is you're going to select the highlights, the neutrals would be your midtones, and the blacks would be your shadows. When I drag this to the left, you'll notice that the image gets really red and orange. And if I drag it to the right, it gets this kind of muted, kind of cyan type color. Now, why is that happening? Well, when I select the reds, we have a lot of reds in this image because if we look at the color wheel here, reds is right next to orange. So basically, since I don't have orange as a choice here, reds and yellows is really going to be targeting that specific tone. And as I drag it to the left, the Selective Color uses the digital color wheel. So when you drag it to the left, you're going to do the opposite of what's on the color on the list. So for example, I have this little chart for you guys. If I drag it to the right, I'm going to add more cyan or more magenta or more yellow into the image. Let me reset that. And if I drag it to the left, I'll get more red, I'll get more green, and I'll get more blue in my images. Now keep in mind that when I'm in Selective Color, it's mixing these colors. So just because I drag it to the left doesn't mean that I'm going to add 100% a true blue. It's going to mix it with those reds along with the other kind of adjustments that I'm making within this Selective Color. The blacks will make the reds a little bit darker or a little bit brighter. So that's kind of just like the basic overall understanding of how Selective Color works, because I think a lot of people get confused when they see the cyan, magenta, yellows, and blacks. Now, if you want this color wheel that I have here, what you can do is you can go to Window, Color, and then here on the top right, you can just change it to Color Wheel. So what's cool about this feature is that now I can specifically, let's say for example, if I'm targeting the reds, I added this little picture diagram here. We know that this is the reds. As I'm manipulating the reds, you'll notice that none of the other colors in this little chart that I dragged in are being manipulated because I've told Photoshop through Selective Color, as I'm mix and matching these colors, you're only doing it to the reds. If I were to go into the blues, which is going to have this sky over here, and I drag it to the left or to the right and make it darker, you're going to notice that only the blues are being targeted, which is super powerful. So let's get started with the actual color grading now. So now the first thing that I want to do is, we know in this image, and I'm going to take this little chart off, is that this image is very orange dominant. Now on the list, you don't see oranges, but it's okay. If we look at this color wheel over here, orange is right in between yellow and red. So that already tells me that I'm going to be targeting the reds and the yellows to really bring out the tone and really bring out the color in this image. So what I'm going to do is when I'm in the reds, I'm gonna have this little chart here to kind of show you what is dictating my decision here. So for example, I know I want these oranges to pop a little bit more, which is under reds. And if I drag it to the left, you'll see that it gets a little bit more orange. But in this example, I'm gonna go about -7. I do want to kick back just a little bit of the magentas, and it's going to mix that color in. Once again, I have to emphasize this, that it's not going to then just make it magenta. Then on the yellows, I do want it to add more yellow, so I'm going to drag it to the right. Now remember, when I drag it to the right, it's going to add more of that color that's on this list. If I go opposite, it's going to add these colors. So when I drag it to the right, it's going to then add just a little bit more yellow. And then on the blacks, I do want these colors to add a little bit more contrast to it. I do want it to be a little bit dark. So I'm going to drag it to the right, and you're going to notice that the reds are now getting a little bit dark. So I'm going to go about 23. Now this leads me to my next point real quick, is that as I'm making these adjustments, you also get this little white dialog box. So whenever I add an adjustment layer, if I add another selective color, automatically I'll get this little white box, which is a layer mask. So basically what that means is this adjustment that I'm currently making is on top of the entire image. It's making that adjustment to the entire image. But if we look closely and I zoom in, pushing Z on the keyboard to zoom in, I'm also affecting the skin tone, because the skin tone has a lot of reds and it has a yellows. So if I'm targeting that with selective color reds and yellows, I'm going to be manipulating the skin tone. In this case, I don't want to do that. I just want to focus on the background. So how am I going to do that? It's going to be with selective color. With layer mask. So now I'm going to click the layer mask, this little white dialog box. I was so confident when I said selective color. So when I click this, the white basically means, once again, it's showing up everywhere. I'm going to push D on the keyboard. It's going to reset the colors here, and I'm going to hit X to invert them. So I'm going to have black. So when I brush with black and I'm selected on this layer mask, what this basically means is I am going to hide that effect wherever I brush. And if you're curious as to where you brush, and if you look down here, you'll see in this little area, it has a little black circle where I brushed. But sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, like where exactly am I brushing? So if I push the backslash key on the keyboard, you'll notice that this is exactly where I brush. So whatever's in red, that's basically telling Photoshop, as I'm making these adjustments of selective color, don't be interfering with the face. I'm going to hit the backslash key again. And if I hit the eyeball before and then after, you'll see that the image now is only targeting the background. So let's go back into selective color. We only did the reds. Remember, we want to get the oranges. Orange is right between yellow and red. So let's get into the yellows now. And I'm going to go a little bit faster. I'm going to add just a little bit of red back into it by dragging it to the left. And then I'm going to add a little bit of magenta going to 5 by dragging it to the right. And then under the yellows, I'm going to add just a little bit more yellow. And then on the blacks, I'm just going to add just a little bit more contrast. So if I hit the before and after, so this is the color that we've currently added. And you can already see specifically, look at the shirt. I'm really adding these nice rich tones to the image. Now to take it a step further, I'm going to go all the way down to the blacks. Now remember, when I select the blacks, that is targeting the shadows and the dark areas of the image. So if I go to the blacks section and I drag it to the right, looking at this little diagram that I have for you guys, it's going to make the image darker. Okay, only in the shadow and dark areas. So why would I want to do that? So as I drag it to the right, I'm going to kind of make it a little bit dramatic here on purpose, is that by doing this, there are not that many shadows on her face. So by darkening up this area here, she's now jumping out of the image because I'm darkening those specific areas. Now 44 is too much, but I want to go maybe about 10. And if I hit the before and after arrow, or before and after eyeball, this is what we've already done with just one single adjustment with selective color. Now let's add a little bit more to that, because I have some of this sky right here, but it's not really showing up as much as I would want to. So what I want to do now is I want to focus on the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another selective color layer here at the bottom. And what's cool is I can stack these selective color layers as many as I want, and I can adjust the layer masks if I choose. So now that I have another color adjustment, I'm gonna now target the sky, which is gonna be predominantly in the blues. So when I select the blues, I can decide now what I wanna do. So I wanna make it darker, so I'm gonna drag it to the right, and you'll see that the blues got dark, and I wanna add more blue. So in order to do that, I would go to the yellow section, and I would drag it to the left, and I'll add just a little bit more blue, and I can add a little bit more cyan by dragging it to the right. Let's go to the cyans and see if I can add more. So if I want it to be darker over here, I would drag it to the right. I would add a little bit more blues into the cyans by dragging it to the left. And let's go into the cyans and drag it to the right. So if I hit the before and after, this is the before and then the after, adding just a little bit more color to that little area. Now that we have kind of like a base tone in the image, there are some issues. Is when I took this photograph, if I zoom into the face, what happened was there's a lot of orange around the face. So there was the sun was hitting off this wall, was adding orange to the face. The orange in the shirt is bouncing up and it's reflecting light. So I want to tone down the skin so that it's not so heavy on the oranges. So I'm gonna add another selective color. And if I go into the reds, what I can do now is I know that the skin tone is predominantly in the red. So I'm gonna find that under the cyans here. Now if I drag it to the left, we know that that's not what we want. We're adding way too much red. So what I wanna do is I kinda wanna desaturate that red. And in order to do that, we're gonna go from red and we're gonna go the opposite and we're gonna go cyan. Now what's cool about that is cyan is the complementary color of red, so it's gonna kind of mix really well. So all I gotta do now is if I look at my little color wheel, opposite of red is gonna be cyan, and we're under the cyan section. I drag it to the right, and if I go +20, what it's doing is once again, it's mixing this cyans into the reds. And if I click the before and then the after, you'll notice that the skin tone kind of gets muted and a little bit desaturated. But the problem is that this is a global adjustment. Remember that when we have this white box, that means it's doing it to the entire image. We don't want that. We were specifically trying to target the skin tones. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna do the opposite now. We're gonna do an inverted mask. I just hit my microphone. We're gonna do an inverted mask by pressing Control-I on the keyboard. So if I press Control-I on the keyboard, I'm gonna press Control, and then I, and you'll notice that the mask now turns to black. And black basically means that this effect that we just did right now is not showing up anywhere. So if I get the brush tool, up here I can choose the size of the brush, the flow, opacity. What I wanna do is I wanna set it to white because white reveals the effect, black hides. So now that I have white and I brush it over the face, I'm gonna get that desaturated orange on the face so that her skin tone isn't so orange. If I wanna take a look at where I just brushed, I hit the backslash and you'll see that right there is only where it's revealing. So if I hit the backslash again, and let me zoom in just a little bit more, pushing Z on the keyboard. So the before and then the after. So I hope you guys are getting the idea of using layer masks and then also using multiple selective color layers to your benefit. The last thing I want to cover is how to add a blend mode to selective color to really give you some more options to set the tone for your image. I'm gonna add an additional selective color layer. And this time though, we're gonna set the blend mode to luminosity. And what luminosity is gonna allow you to do, it's gonna allow you to adjust the tone and the luminance tones in those colors. So now we're not worried about adding color now. We're just worried about setting the tone for those specific color choices that we choose. So in other words, if I go up here to colors and I switch it to red, because we know that this image is dominantly red and yellow, what I can do now, because I'm under luminosity, ignore all of these little color choices. All we have to worry about is knowing is if I drag it to the right, it's gonna make it darker. If I drag it to the left, it's gonna make that tone brighter. Now the tricky part is that you kind of have to mess around with these options here in order to get the look that you want. But I think the easiest thing to understand is just play around with it. Right will make it darker, left will make it brighter. So in this case, I'm gonna enter in the settings just so you guys can see the before and after. So I'm gonna go here and we're gonna go -6 and then 3. And let's take a look at this. So before and then the after, just a small subtle effect. We know that when I adjust the blacks, it's targeting the shadows, so I am making the tonality of the shadows and the blacks just a little bit darker. Let's also go into the yellows and let's adjust the tonality of the yellow. So I'm gonna go -8. We're gonna go 7, 13, and then 5. We're also gonna go into the blues to make some adjustments to the blues. We're gonna go 27, 24, and then we're also gonna make these blues a little bit darker by increasing it to 32, okay? So if I hit the before and then the after, and let me just move this off to the side so you can see the blues. So before and then the after. Now, the most important one, and I think this luminosity works really well when we get into the blacks, is now I can kind of target these tonalities in the colors to either make them brighter or darker. So I'm gonna go 3, I'm gonna go 1, we're gonna go 5, 3, and I like what it did to the overall tonality of the image. And what really helped is this area in here to really make her pop. And I don't like what it's doing to the face. So what I'm gonna do is get the brush tool. We're gonna set it to black and we're gonna erase it, this adjustment on the face. Now an extra option is sometimes maybe you're looking at an image and then you decide like, oh, you know what, maybe I went a little bit too far. You can always decrease the settings, but you can also decrease the opacity. So if I go into the opacity, I feel like the effect looks nice, but maybe we can tone it down. And let's go to maybe around 80% opacity. And all the opacity is doing is it is just diminishing the effect by 20% because I went to 80. So if I click the before and then the after, now let's take a look at the overall image. I'm gonna hold Shift, grab all of these images, pressing Control G, and this is the before where it looked very flat. The colors are not really popping. And with selective color, this is the final image that we get for this specific photo. I hope you're seeing the benefits of how selective color works. And if you guys want to get a more in-depth look into Photoshop, I want to talk about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives. Skillshare offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative people on topics such as photography, productivity, business, and more. Make great use of your downtime and check out Skillshare's online classes, which include a combination of video lessons and class projects. They offer a wide range of categories from photography, film and video, and graphic design. One of the classes that I watched was Instagram-worthy photography, shoot, edit, share with Brandon Wolfel. And what I really enjoyed about that class is the structure. You really get to see from beginning to end his process as to how he composes the shots, how he edits his photographs. But what makes it awesome is that it's only about an hour long. So it's something that you can simply just dive into. It gets straight to the point. And that course really inspired me to want to start shooting natural light again, especially during golden hour. For everything Skillshare offers, it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 2-month free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Back to the video. Now that you have a basic understanding of selective color, I want to show you a couple more images, but this time we're going to go a little bit faster. So I already have some preset layers already set up with selective color, and I've used a layer mask because I didn't want it to target the white in the outfit. But what I want to show you is how you can color grade the specific shadows in an image. So if I go to blacks, we're on the normal blend mode, which basically means I can adjust colors. Now because I'm in blacks, we know we can now color grade the shadows and the blacks. So when I do that, what I can do now is I can then come in and add a little bit of blue to my yellows. So when I do this, what's going to happen is I am going to add blue into my dark areas. Now obviously that's too much, so maybe I would go about -4. And what's cool about doing the blues in the shadows is that that's the opposite color of orange, which is the complementary color. Since we already have orange in the pants and oranges in the skin tone, it would make sense to have blues in our shadows. And I'll add a little bit of contrast here. So I've color graded the shadows so that we can get a complementary color scheme. But what I really want to show you is how we can color grade this sky back here. And what I'm going to do is, obviously that's going to be in the cyans and the blues. Right now the sky, there's really not a lot of richness to the sky, and we're going to use selective color to our advantage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go into the cyans, and I'm going to quickly add in some settings to really make that bump. 12 to get that really cyan look. We're going to add 5 for the magentas. We're going to add a little bit of blue, and we're not going to mess with this one. We're going to go into blues, and you're going to see a big effect when I increase the blues to cyan. I really added that cyan look there. So if I hit the before and then the after, we're really adding that tone inside. Then we're going to go -3. If I wanted to, I can add more blue, and about 29 looks pretty good. And then I can make it a little bit darker by going +5. But what I really want to do is that right here, we know that this little sky area here is really bright, but there's not really a color that's really making it stand out and pop. So what we're going to target instead of the cyans and the blues is we're going to target now the whites, because we know that selecting the whites is going to target the bright areas. So if I go to whites, this is where we're going to see a dramatic effect. So if I drag it to the right, it's going to add more cyans into the bright areas. So pay attention to this sky area over here and here. Then I'm going to add a little bit of green to it, because I want to stay on this side of the color wheel, right? So blue, cyan, and green. And then here, obviously, I want more blue in there in my highlights. I'm going to add it to -22. And I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go into the 34 range, 32. So let me emphasize, when I added that green, and you're probably asking, like, what the hell is this guy doing? That's why I love to use this color wheel as I'm color grading, because it makes sense. I'm on this same side here, which I believe is analogous. If I have it wrong, I'll definitely put it on the screen, but it all stays on the same side. So let's basically take a look at the before and after. Look at that sky difference. Beautiful, beautiful tones by just using the selective color, by targeting the blues, the cyans, and the whites. And the whites, can't even say it, and the whites. Oh my gosh. I want to show you one more example because I really want you to see the true power of selective color, because on this photo I got a lot of feedback on my colors, and I definitely want to show you what I did to achieve the colors. So the first layer that I did with selective color was I changed the blend mode to luminosity, and as a reminder, when you're on the luminosity blend mode, you're adjusting the tonal values. So that basically means if I drag any of these sliders to the right, it's going to make it darker. If I drag it to the left, it's going to make it brighter, and I am not going to be adjusting any colors whatsoever. So on this one, I went to the reds, and I wanted the stuff to be a little bit more dark and a little bit more rich to bring back some of that detail. So that's why you're seeing a lot of them shift to the right. And the same thing with the yellows, because we had a lot of red and yellows in the background. I don't think I went into the cyans. I went a little bit to the right, and that's going to target kind of like the jacket here, the blues, and I think I went in the whites and I made them just a little bit darker, and the blacks I didn't do anything. So let's just look at what this kind of tonality did, and I set this as a base so that I can get ready, so that I can start pushing some colors. So on this next one, this was an overall color adjustment on the normal blend mode. So now I'm manipulating colors, and what I did on this one was I went into the reds and the yellows, because this image has a lot of red and yellows. We have the skin tone, and then we have this magenta type background here. So reds and then the yellows. And then on this one, if I wanted to, I can go into magentas. If I really wanted to push the magentas and make them a little bit darker, I go to the magenta section, I go to blacks, and I drag it to the right. And you're gonna notice I get a little bit more detail back into that sky. So let's just take a look at the first two that I've already set. So this was tonality, color, and then I really wanted to push that sky. I really wanted to mesh everything together. So what I did is I made another selective color, but this time I didn't want the color to be manipulated here at the bottom. So I used a layer mask. Now we learned that at the very beginning of the tutorial. I'm gonna hit the backslash key to show you basically where I color graded it. Now I know some of it's not like perfect here, but I can go back in there and I can brush it in if I needed to. So let's do that just for example's sake. So here we go there, and a little bit of the hair. Backslash, that's good enough. So what I did is I added an additional one to really make those magentas pop, and I think this is the one that really made the overall image really shine here. So if I go into selective color, some of the adjustments I made were in the reds and in the yellows. And let's kind of recap the reds real quick, because I'm on the normal blend mode and I'm adjusting the color. So I wanted it to be more red, so I dragged it to the right. I wanted it to be more magenta, so I dragged it to the right. I'm sorry, I went to the left here. And then on the yellows, I wanted it to be a little bit more yellow. So I'm mixing all of these colors into my reds. And then I went into yellows. Of course, I added more magentas into those yellows and I added a little bit more yellow. And then I went into the blacks and I added just a little bit more dark to the overall image, a little bit more contrast. And let's take a look at the before and after here with the selective color. So before and then the after. Now that concludes my in-depth look at selective color. We talked about how selective color uses the digital color wheel to adjust the colors. We looked at blend modes and layer masks. Now, if you guys enjoyed this tutorial and want to see more in-depth intermediate tutorials, I have full edit tutorials on my YouTube channel. I have skin retouching tutorials as well. So check those out. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.